Good morning, everybody, and sorry for the slight delay. Just want to say a huge welcome to everybody to our second UDL conference. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Nia Plunkett, and I'm the Head of Teaching and Learning here at ATU Sligo. Last year, you might remember, we had our first inaugural conference online, and we had over 500 participants. So this year, it's so exciting for us to be able to have it here on campus in real life. A very special welcome to you, Minister Simon Harris. Thank you so much for coming today. You very kindly provided us with a welcome video last year, but when I met you on campus last August, I think I kind of hijacked you or cornered you into agreeing to come today to be on campus. But to be fair, you didn't really need much convincing, so thank you so much. I think that in itself shows the commitment you have to UDL from a teaching and learning perspective. As you all know, events like these just don't happen. There's a huge amount of organising, toing and froing, and a lot of box ticking to get to where we are today, and that's on top of the regular day job. I've been so fortunate to work with many people over the last number of months, but because of one thing and another, people have come and gone because of maternity leave, new jobs, etc. But I want to take this opportunity to thank, first of all, Elaine Smith and Patrick Cassidy, who were with me at the start of all the organising. And then Patricia Henry, who returned from maternity leave and straight into the mayhem. And more recently, Louise Farrick, who joined the team and just slotted right in like a pro. You have all really helped make this happen, so thank you. I also want to introduce the members of ATU Sligo's UDL Working Group, whose advice, professionalism and their drive to implement UDL has really propelled us from the early stages of staff having an understanding of UDL to an institute-wide implementation and evaluation. Because without including the student voice, how can we know what we are doing is effective? So a big thank you to the following members who will be presenting and chairing themes throughout the day. Maureen Harn, Geraldine Dowling, Mairead McCann and Cathy O'Kelly, all lecturers here. Shelley Brady, our Disability Officer, and Ella McCabe and Jennifer Gilligan, our two instructional designers. I want to also welcome Colin Tierney, the UDL Development Coordinator at ATU Galway Mayo, along with members of his UDL working group, including Laura Hegarty, who will also be chairing themes and whom we will meet later. We have colleagues here from ATU Donegal who have been involved in creating poster presentations, and you'll get a chance to view them more during the lunchtime. It's just wonderful to have colleagues here from all over Ireland, not just across from the ATU, but our soon-to-be partners from St Angela's College, and those of you who have travelled from Hibernia College, AHEAD, TU Dublin, MTU, Dublin Business School, the Insurance Institute, Ulster University, the HSE Centre for Nursing and Midwifery Education, National Council for the Blind, Centre for Excellence in Universal Design under the National Disability Authority, and colleagues and faculty from Georgian College in Canada. So I hope you all got your welcome pack, enjoyed the coffee and music, and are now ready to sit back and thoroughly engage in the day ahead. I would now like to call on our President, Dr. Orla Flynn, to formally open the conference. Thank you.
Garmagat Niamh, Ara Simon Harris, agus a card go léir, is mór na nórdam a bheith anseo sligach armagin chun fáilte churibh Coch. And a warm welcome to Atlantic Technological University, to one and all, and especially to all of our speakers today, and a very warm welcome to Dr. Sean Bracken from University of Worcester, who's here as our keynote speaker. I have to say it was fabulous coming in this morning to hear the beautiful music, to kind of get a sense of the atmosphere. It's been so long, I think, since we've been able to mingle and to gather and to exchange views in person. And I think we're all really, really appreciating what we lost in the last couple of years. And I think we're getting a lot of mileage out of that. So it was just lovely earlier this morning to have staff, students, and the atmosphere there. And I hope that continues throughout the day. You'll all have heard me there about 8 weeks ago on our designation as Atlantic TU that we're going to be developing a strategic plan for ATU, and that's going to be kicking off fairly soon. But in the meantime, we're trying to come together as one university, and as one university, we are embracing the strategic objectives of our three partner institutes. And as one university, we do want to foster inclusion and participation of all of our students across all our programs and on all of our campuses. But in ATU Sligo, it has long been an explicit action to embed universal design for learning across programs with appropriate training and support. And UDL is a set of inclusive principles for curriculum development that give all students equal opportunities to learn by providing a range or a variety of strategies and resources to help meet diverse learning needs. I was particularly pleased to see what I would have known from previous work as the graphic harvesting that goes on, and I think that's going to be a very exciting process during the day and outcome at the end as well. But improving accessibility to learning and ultimately to increase student success, because ultimately that is what we're all about. So the Centre for Enhancement of Learning and Teaching, CELT, was established in 2018 by Dr. Nia Plunkett, and under the remit of CELT, a Universal Design for Learning working group was established a year later with both academic and professional services staff with a common goal to create this inclusive culture in teaching, learning and assessment. UDL was considered here from a bottom-up as well as a top-down perspective, and this has proven to be a really effective and holistic approach that has resonated well with both staff and students. Principles of UDL are now automatically embedded during programme construction in learning outcomes, teaching and learning approaches and assessment strategies. And I suppose what has been most impressive for me anyway since 2018 has been the adoption of UDL across the 3 ATU partner colleges. And I'm delighted that Niamh mentioned participants from our Donegal College and Galway Mayo College as well. So we have UDL facilitators who've been trained, and they're now in place across all 3 colleges, plus St Angela's College, Sligo as well, 20 in total, and there's 166 digital badge recipients from across all 4 of those partners. And this is testimony not just to Niamh's persuasiveness, which is significant, but also to the compelling nature of the evidence of the need for UDL and to the commitment of all of our staff, lecturing and professional services to the need for an inclusive approach to teaching and learning. And I have no doubt, but this will be a strong element for the ATU strategy for teaching and learning in this focus on our learners as we develop that strategy over the coming months. And in a week when we've seen the government announcement of strong commitment for an integrated tertiary system, bringing an even greater need to support all of our learners through their educational journey, I'm delighted to welcome Minister for Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science, Minister Simon Harris, to mark the establishment of the Higher Education Centre of Excellence in UDL and to formally open our UDL conference. Gur Mágaibh.
Well, thank you very much, Orla, President. Thank you so much for having us here today. Delighted to be with you here today, and it's great to be here in person. I think we ought to send a virtual message last year, so thank you very much for having me here. Delighted to be joined by my colleague, Minister Frank Feehan, Colin Markey, MEP, and Councillor Thomas Walsh. Thank you all for being here. It's hard to believe it's only been about 2 months, I think, since we were here last for what was an incredible day. We're still kind of buzzing, I think, from that amazing day that was your commencement day and the beginning of this new exciting journey for the Atlantic Technological University. I really want to thank everybody who has worked so hard to get to this point. I know there's a huge body of work going on. I get to come to all the nice parts, but I know there's a massive body of work that's gone into embedding the new technological university, bringing together 3 formerly separate institutions and creating, I suppose, a culture in terms of what we want the Atlantic Technological University to be. And I really think that brings us very nicely to today, because very early on in the life of Atlantic Technological University, we're here at this really important conference about universal design. We're here for the opening of your Centre of Excellence in Atlantic Technological University, and that speaks volumes to the heart, to the ethos and to the culture of this new university in our higher education landscape. I want to really thank Dr. Nia Plunkett. You gave a very accurate description of what happened to me the last time I was here. I think you said I was hijacked by you, but I was delighted to be, and really genuinely was, because your passion and that of your team spoke volumes to me that day. I could immediately tell that this wasn't just somebody having a conversation with me for the sake of it or sticking a poster on the wall, but that this ran through the very veins of all the work that you do here. And I really want to congratulate you and thank you, Niamh, for your incredible leadership, persuasiveness and advocacy, and all of your team who've worked so hard. Gurmina Maga for all that you have done. I think it's been really brilliant. I'm also conscious that a lot of work goes into organising these events. Again, we get to turn up and share some thoughts with you, but a huge amount of work. So to all of the staff here, the student team helping outside, the musicians who've added, particularly though to the artist who's given me a very complimentary head of dark brown hair. which I haven't had since I entered the Department of Health 6 years ago, let alone in this role. That was particularly, I want to particularly thank the artist, but no, thank you to everybody who's worked so hard in organising today's event. I must say I'm delighted to see that this conference is going to specifically consider the student voice and their perspectives of UDL, because that's what we're about. We're about making sure that colleges, that universities, that higher education works for the student. We're about making sure that we embed universal design for learning so that every student can prosper, every student can reach their full potential. I really do believe that nothing can be more important than hearing from the student themselves, hearing their experiences, hearing their views, getting their insights on what UDL should be. I want to commend everybody here in ATU Sligo for the substantial progress that you've already made when it comes to UDL, for the high quality education experience that you're providing to students, and that is making education more accessible for a much wider range of learners. It is true to say, and I mean this genuinely, you're leading the way here in Sligo, and as I travel the country and as I talk at conferences and I meet with others, what's happening here in Sligo is what wants to be happening all across the country. So I want to commend you for leading the way when it comes to UDL. We also have to be honest though when we're talking about universal. We're not yet where we need to be. This is a journey. Good progress has been made. You are leading the way in Sligo, but we all have a journey to go to get to the place we want to get to that destination where every citizen in this country, no matter who they are, where they came from, what gender they are, what their mother or father did before them, whether they have a disability or not, how they learn, whatever, that you can reach your full potential. And we've work to do. We've progress made, but we have work to do. And it's hard work. You know, it's hard work. It's not just sloganeering, and it's actual a hard slog, because it means every single one of us involved in education, we all have to change. We all have to do things a little bit differently. And we have to try and create a culture of engagement and inclusion that works for students. We have to rethink and change our behaviour. And actually changing behaviour is one of the hardest things that you actually have to ever do. But it's worth it. It's so worth it. Because when we do it, not only does the student with a disability or the whatever, you know, the atypical student, and I prefer to focus on the ability of a student, but we all benefit. Not just one group of students, everybody benefits. And the really encouraging thing we're already seeing, and I see this every institution I go into that's trying to embrace UDL, is that yes, they started a project to try and help the student with a disability. But actually, it's helped every student because it's created that inclusive culture. We were opening sensory rooms thinking some group of students might benefit, but everybody's benefited, because who doesn't need a bit of quiet time or a bit of quiet space? We could do one of them in the Dáil for certain. But I mean, we all benefit from this universal, inclusive approach that we're taking. And I think that's one of the really important learnings that we all have to do. We're not doing it for this group or that group. We're doing it because we know that it actually benefits every student. It benefits every member of staff, and it benefits the entire education and higher education system. Having said that, I do want to update you today on two announcements I'll be making next week. So to give you a preview at your conference today in relation to proposals I'll bring to Cabinet next week. And these are proposals to involve ring-fenced funding for the next number of years to embed universal design, particularly focusing on students with autism, autistic students, and then secondly, developing a new pathway for students with intellectual disabilities to transition from the second level education system into the third level education system. When I say that our journey is not complete, you know, I still am a minister in a country who has to sit in front of parents of children with Down syndrome who cried, and this happened. They cried, and one woman said to me, she said, not only do I not watch my son progress after school like every other mother and father seems to, I have to actively watch my son regress in front of my eyes. So we have a piece of work that we need to do here in relation to making sure that we move beyond that. So next week, we will develop two new proposals. One is significant investment of, once the podium's not going to blow up, we're beginning to get worried there. One, we're going to make a significant level of investment in relation to embedding UDL based on feedback that we have around autistic students and their experiences. This will be a once-off investment in every publicly funded higher education institution in the course of the next academic year. That will, I think, enable us to accelerate a lot of the really good work that's being done around sensory provision, sensory spaces, but also around Pathfinder apps, around training for staff, around a lot of the good stuff you're already doing here. And then secondly, we'll announce next week, from 12 months' time, phase 2 is the development of new pathways and supports for people with intellectual disabilities. Really good work going on in some places. We have the Trinity Centre for people with intellectual disabilities. I don't want to have to come and say, isn't it great we have a Trinity Centre? I want that to become the norm across the sector. So we'll talk to you more about that next week. We also will have our new National Access Plan very shortly. We intend to bring this to Cabinet at the end of June. Again, objectively, we've made huge progress over the last 20 years when it comes to access. The figures all show that. But again, behind the headline figures, we're not measuring some things. There have been certain groups that we never measure in terms of participation. So I can't find figures for progression rates for autistic students. I can't find figures for progression rates for students with intellectual disabilities because we haven't measured them. And if you don't measure them, you can't actually work out whether you're making progress or not. So the National Access Plan will have a number of new priority groups that it will measure over the next number of years the progress that we make for those groups. And I think that's really important. It will also, though, do more than that. It won't just measure access, because getting somebody in the door is not easy. I'm not suggesting it is, but it's perhaps easier than actually watching what happens after they got in the door in terms of their journey through the college and university and what comes after higher education as well. So changing what we measure, making it a bit tougher for all of us, I suppose, to be seen to be doing well. But I think that's really important. So you can, I think we can collectively look forward to that in the coming weeks, and I intend to launch that at the end of June. Look, this is very important to me. I wouldn't be in politics if it wasn't for a belief in inclusive education. I got involved in politics as a moody teenager who saw the stress and strain on my parents' faces when they couldn't get my brother Adam, who has autism, into a school. I was, again, as that moody, opinionated teenager, campaigning when a new second-level school was built for it to become the first school in the country to have special classes for children with autism. And that's what introduced me to politics. And in talking to Adam, and indeed in talking to my brother as recently as this morning, we were just reflecting on his own personal journey. You know, he is an individual who managed to go through, started life in a special needs school, was mainstreamed into a primary school with special needs supports and the likes, then went on to a mainstream secondary school, did very well, got what he wanted in terms of his CAO process, turned up in university, and sure, he may as well have turned up on Planet Zog. And that was his experience. You know, finding a hugely intelligent person, much more intelligent than I, comes in the doors of a university on day one and just feels like genuinely that he's on a strange planet, and wasn't in a position to continue his college journey. So this matters, and there are countless stories around the country as to why UDL matters. Why we have to make sure that the progress that we made, and we're not done and we have a lot to do, but the progress that we made at primary level and secondary level, we don't see a new cliff edge, that the cliff edge just moves from second level into third level. And we know with the demographic bulge, we're going to see a lot of students leaving secondary school shortly and coming on to third level, and we're going to see a lot of students who've gone through the second level system with a disability and have done largely well, coming and looking to our system and our higher education system to accommodate them. And that's why we have to get this right. So whilst I wouldn't be brave enough to speak for my brother, and he's well able to speak for himself, I know this matters. And I know there are countless families around the country who are depending on us, who are depending on you to get this right. And I want to support you in that regard as well. I think we also have to be honest when we're at a conference about inclusion, that UDL is a huge part. Cost of education is another big part. Got to get this right. I would never apologise, even if it upsets or offends some people, for talking about the fact that the costs of going to higher education in Ireland are still too high. There's still austerity level type fees. 2 children trying to do a university degree at the same time, and that's the norm for a lot of families. 2-3 kids going to college at the same time. If you have 2 kids, 4-year degree program, it's 24 grand just in registration fees. So we have published a government policy that says we want to reduce the registration fee, separate and distinct, not robbing the pot of core funding, but we do want to reduce the registration fee over the next number of budgets and radically improve the student grants. Student grants do begin to improve from September, but more work we need to do, and Vanessa and I had a word about that on the way in. And then the second piece, I think UDL cost, the third piece, I think does have to be, as your president alluded to, that piece in relation to an integrated third level system. We've lots of good examples of kind of informal relationships that have built up locally where further education and training and higher education are working together. That needs to become the norm. We cannot live in a country where you could have 2 students sitting side by side, both of whom want to be nurses. One student does really well in the Leaving Cert, gets great points, and off he or she goes and becomes a nurse. The other student doesn't do as well, but would make a better nurse. And that's the country we live in at the moment. So in return for a very significant level of investment in higher education, an additional 307 million over the next couple of years, and I hope we do this over the next 3 years, in return for that level of investment, making sure that we create those pathways between further education and higher education, I think will be crucial if we want to create a culture of real inclusion when it comes to higher education. So we have a lot of work to do, but today is a really important step forward. I'm extremely proud of what's happening in the Atlantic Technological University. I had cause to use a quote from Seamus Heaney last Friday at an event I was at. It is my favourite quote, and I think it's really apt today. I was thinking about it coming down in the car, because what we're all trying to do here is create a bit of hope. Create a bit of hope that we can actually create an inclusive system, create a bit of hope that people who in the past couldn't access or thrive in higher education can in the future. But sometimes people like to think hope is a bit woolly. You know, so that's all of them with their hope and their optimism. But that's not what hope is about at all. And as Seamus Heaney said, hope isn't optimism which expects things to turn out well, but it's something rooted in the conviction that there is good worth working for. This is the good worth working for. What you're doing is the good worth working for. And we're doing it because we know it matters. We know it can be transformational, and we know it needs to be done. I just want to congratulate each and every one of you, Niamh and all your team, for your huge leadership and bringing together this excellent conference today. Gurmina Magov.
Thank you very much, Minister Harris, for your kind words and for your support in taking time out of what I know is a very busy schedule for yourself and your colleagues for coming today. And it's a testament of your support for this whole area of universal design for learning and inclusive curriculum, and we're very grateful for your time. As Orla mentioned in her talk there at the start, inclusion of universal design for learning as a specific action in our last strategic plan demonstrated our commitment to adopting a more inclusive curriculum design to suit the diverse needs of all learners. However, review of awareness of UDL, particularly among our academic staff colleagues, identified that many didn't understand what UDL was. Some viewed it with some scepticism. Some considered it only related to students with disability and access-related issues. And lastly, there was, they're very busy, and there was it wasn't a lack of time in terms of how to include universal design for learning in curriculum design. So as you know, Niamh and colleagues have provided a lot of leadership and support to academic teams in terms of trying to promote universal design for learning to date. But today, I'm really delighted to announce the formal establishment of the Higher Education Universal Design for Learning Centre of Excellence at Atlantic Technological University. And this is an indication of our aim to actively foster inclusion and participation of all students through embedding UDL across our programmes with appropriate training and support. The Centre for Excellence will provide leadership and direction in terms of integrating UDL into curriculum. It will establish and promote best practices. It will promote research, and that will obviously help underpin our practice. It will support education through training and workshops, and it will define and develop best practice and standards. And this will ensure that staff have the support that they need to embed UDL in the curriculum. And it would also help us to further enable synergies and developments between higher education, further education, and second-level educators. So at ATU, we are absolutely delighted to formally launch this centre as part of our conference today. And a second happy task that also falls to me is to formally announce the launch of our Postgraduate Certificate and Master of Arts in Universal Design for Learning. And this programme at ATU is the first of its kind in Ireland, and it will add to our existing portfolio of universal design related training, which we already have some inclusive curriculum elective modules in the Teaching and Learning Diploma in ATU Galway Mayo and in the MA in ATU Donegal. But this new programme is a full programme which is focused on UDL to allow those who wish to develop their expertise in UDL further. The programme has been developed with a range of key stakeholders from the UCD Access Department, the Udl Digital Badge National Rollout Lead, AHEAD, FE and ETB representatives, and also with the Centre for Excellence in Universal Design. This programme arose out of the discussions at the UDL conference last year, so it's really great to see it getting to the point of validation and launch for September. And you can find out more about the programme by talking to Niamh and other colleagues in the Teaching Learning Office in ATU Sligo. So I'm sure you will join me in thanking Niamh and the team involved in the launch of the ATU Centre for Excellence, to Maureen Harron and the programme team for the new postgraduate certificate in MA in UDL, and for all those involved in today's conference for their efforts and their leadership in driving this area forward. And we really look forward to some interesting discussions today. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. So now I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Dr. Sean Bracken as our keynote speaker today. Sean, who is a native of Portlaoise, is a principal lecturer at the University of Worcester and is a principal fellow of the HEA. You will have read Sean's bio on the webpage and in the conference pack, but just to recap, Sean has worked internationally as a primary and secondary teacher, a teacher educator, a lecturer and an educational project manager in a diverse number of countries, including the US, Ireland, Samoa, the UK and Papua New Guinea. For the past 10 years, Sean has acted as the course coordinator for the National Award SENCO. In addition, he teaches on the PG Cert in Learning and Teaching, and he also supervises students pursuing doctoral and master's level studies. Sean is passionate about enhancing learning opportunities and outcomes for all students, but is especially interested in the attainment of non-traditional learners. His research interests are concerned with the nature of curriculum design and enactment and the potentials inherent in UDL to strengthen our students' outcomes in higher education. Recently, Sean has led projects with colleagues at universities in Brazil and Morocco aimed at building collegiate capacity for research and inclusion. Sean, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. That's fantastic. Great. God, what a pleasure to be here. What a really exciting time to be here as well. For higher education policy and practice, and especially for you, for all of you from Atlantic Technological University. So the title of the presentation is Reimagining the Future Topographies of UDL. It's flipping perspectives from learning global to local and local to global. So let's see. And here we go. So I am hoping that generally when I give presentations, I do have the closed captions on actually, so I'm not sure, but we'll work without them, I suppose, this morning. First of all, I suppose, let me describe myself. I'm an academic in my late 50s, so I'm follically challenged, or getting there. Greying beard, and I'm wearing a suit today. I have unusually so, a red tie on and a blue suit and some nice new shoes for the occasion. So I'll give you a little bit of an overview in terms of mapping the topographies for UDL. So initially what I'd like to do is to give you a little bit of an insight about who I am and where I'm coming from, and I suppose how that has informed my own UDL journey. And it was interesting listening to the Minister talk about the fact that we are on a journey here nationally and at Atlantic Technological University as well. So I'll give you a small little potted history of kind of where I'm coming from. Then I'd like to look at the evolving nature of universal design for learning. And David Rose, who's one of the key founders of the concept, has recently written about cracks in the foundations, but I'm not sure if they're cracks in the foundations or if they're actually growing pains in relation to what UDL might be and its promise, actually. I think learning from disability rights, learning from the rights of people with physical disabilities or intellectual disabilities, and how I think the advocacy that they've managed to bring to the table has impacted upon other identity areas in terms of inclusive education for all. Then I'd like to look at a little bit around the legislative response to equality, diversity and inclusion, and that imperative within Ireland. And then the concept of actually flipping the university outwards, and then gleaning insights from the diversities that exist amongst your cohorts, geographically from Letterkenny all the way to Galway and out to the Gaeltacht as well. And then looking at possible future directions for UDL. So this is partly my journey here. As Niamh knows, I'm not just here for this gig. I was here for my dad's 90th birthday, which took place on Tuesday. And those are my dad's hands. And interestingly, when my dad, was growing up, he consistently comes back to the fact, he's a very accomplished businessman actually, but he comes back to the fact that he had to leave school when he was 14 years of age. And I think about the potential that that man, not that he has lost, because he's had a really good life, but I think about the potential that he might have enhanced in his life had he had that capacity to continue with his education. And my mother, who happens to be here, Nancy Bracken, Áine Ban, Ní Bhrachán, was a primary school teacher. And fortunately for her, the ban on women teaching when they became married was lifted in the year that she became married in 1958. And I'm getting some nods from around the tables, because I don't think that people are aware, I suppose, of the extent of the sociological changes that have taken place within this country, and actually justifiably so, and how recent it has been that some of those changes have taken place, particularly in relation to women in the workforce. So as Minister Harris was saying, I think we've certainly come a heck of a long way, but there's a lot more to be done. The picture that's there is of Durrow National School, and I know Durrow was in the news quite unfortunately there with the murder of one of their teachers quite recently, and how traumatic that is for a school and for a community. So thinking about the nature of those types of impacts that can occur to whole communities, and how education, I suppose, can be a healing balm for those communities as well. But partly the reason that I have Durrow here as well is that I can recall going there as a primary school teacher or primary school student and using the inkwell, with the blotting paper. So just thinking about the advances in technology that have taken place in my lifetime, it's just absolutely phenomenal. It really is. So I think the affordances of technology are something that we really need to grab onto as we continue that journey of inclusive practice in higher education. So what's the link between Durrow and Rotimi Adebari, who was a minister, or he was the Lord Mayor of Portlaoise, elected Lord Mayor of Portlaoise, the first Nigerian Lord Mayor outside of Nigeria, I will have you know, is the fact that as a child in Durrow, we collected for money for children in Biafra, as it was then. And as it happens, Rotimi Adebari happens to be from that particular region of Nigeria, and how things have changed. So that sort of sense of, it was the sense of condescending giving to some extent. Which almost typified that aspect of primary school, adding the money into the box for black babies, as it were, and then to have a leader within our own community. It's just so welcoming to see that representation and to see that diversity growing within the country. So thinking about that mapping from the personal into the historical, cultural, or socio barriers that have maybe typified some of your own experiences. Minister Harris spoke about his brother earlier on, and what I'd like to do is to just give it back to yourselves for a little minute and just to think for 2 minutes, what are some of the barriers that you may have encountered in relation to your own education or in relation to people within your families or within your communities that you're familiar with, perhaps through your lifetime. So over to you for 2 minutes of discussion, just a little bit of a conversation at your tables, please. I'm going to join this table here. I'll bet that there's some really interesting conversations to be had. But over to you. Okay, I'll bring you back. Thank you so much. And I think, sorry to interrupt. I know that those table conversations are really, really engaging, and they set the scene. And I think to some extent that's what it's about. It's kind of reflecting yourself and thinking about the context that you're in and using that as the basis to kind of question a little bit further. And I think it's not for nothing that one of the first changes that took place in terms of the UDL guidelines and frameworks I think it was about 2011, was that the focus on engagement, which used to live over on the far side. There was representation, action and expression, and then it became engagement. But the shift was to make it, if we're reading from right to left, was to put that concept of engagement and the affective dimension in terms of education, to put that at the heart. And I really believe that that's what it's about. And I think Nia was speaking earlier on about the centrality of the learner voice. That's what it is. So, and in terms of enabling the learner voice and accessing the learner voice, that's partly about our own histories and recognizing our own histories and recognizing at sometimes our own powers as an able-bodied kind of middle-aged white guy, some of the privileges that come along with that, and that recognizing that and being able to deconstruct that and facilitate other ways of thinking in regards to access. So that element around engagement, to me, as I said, it's very Vygotskian. It very much lives on the relational part, making relationships matter with learners, and then thinking about representation, multiple means of representation, whether those are graphic representations, as we're seeing over here, those wonderful graphic representations, whether it's the digital representation that we're seeing here behind me, or whether there are other forms, written forms or oral forms, just thinking about the diverse ways in which access can be provided to learners. And then action and expression, which tends to be kind of most closely associated, I would say, with diversity in relation to assessments. So how do we not compromise on the challenge that we provide for learners, or not compromise in terms of learning outcomes, but provide those multiple pathways of assessment, enabling learners to provide evidence that they have attained those learning outcomes. I think a lot of times there tends to be a misinterpretation that by somehow introducing universal design for learning, we're diluting elements of the curriculum. Not at all. I would say we're actually enriching it and enabling the potential of the curriculum itself to be challenging and to be lively. So just to talk a little bit about the evolving nature of universal design for learning, and particularly over the past couple of years, I think, in light of the Black Lives Matter initiatives in the United States. So initially, the Center for Applied Special Technology, or CAST, was created in 1984 to explore how the emerging uses of technology back then, particularly Microsoft technologies, and how those affordances of technologies could facilitate learning for learners with disabilities. And I had the really amazing pleasure to work with a colleague, Katie Novak, in producing this book, Transforming Higher Education Through Universal Design for Learning. And David Rose wrote the preface to that. And in the foreword, he says, the necessity to challenge UDL to some extent. When it moves outside of the area that it's associated with, primarily where it grew from in Boston, in New England, or in Harvard University. And he shared only by studying the values, strategies, challenges, technologies, and innovative practices of other cultures and ecologies are we likely to construct a future UDL that is flexible and subtle enough to work everywhere and for everyone. And I have to say, I think that's currently what's happening here in Ireland. There's a real engine about Ireland at the moment. There's an incredible buzz in this country in relation to accessibility, in relation to inclusion, and putting that at the heart of policy and practice. So, as I mentioned, David Rose has spoken and written some blogs recently about, saying where there are cracks in the foundations in the design of the initial Universal Design for Learning framework. Well, I'm not sure that they're cracks. I think they're growing pains. I think Universal Design for Learning is shifting and it's moving. It's moving into new geographical spaces. It's moving into new cultural spaces. And with that, he's written a blog, and I am going to share a little bit from this blog. I'm going to read this out, the information that's on the slide. So it says, UDL must also play a stronger, more explicit role in addressing barriers and injustices that were not adequately addressed in the original guidelines. Urgently among those are the barriers and injustices that affect people primarily based on who they are rather than what they can do, on their identity rather than on their ability. And those barriers go by the names racism, sexism, genderism, ethnocentrism, classism, and ableism. So I think that as the Minister had pointed out earlier on, when we adopt UDL, I think it is generally really sound for inclusive practice right across the board. And I think we're seeing that from ATU to UCD and other places that have systematically begun to adopt UDL. In relation to the response, there's a lot of text in this, but I think it reflects what Minister Harris was saying earlier on. And this text is from the Higher Education Authority Bill of 2022. And I think it's exciting because, again, generally, I think what tends to happen in universities is that you get isolates. You get universities acting individually, creating great practice, most definitely, but acting in a bit of a kind of a silo mode. Whereas what this bill reflects is the policy of the dynamism that's driving this country forward in terms of inclusive practice at the moment. And I think I'd be remiss if I wasn't to mention the work of AHEAD in particular in informing that. They've been just an incredible hub to the wheel of all of the universities throughout the country. The work of Dara Ryder and colleagues there has just been absolutely superb. And at the risk of kind of doing what academics are not supposed to do, which is to read all the text in the slide, I'm going to. And it's saying that the Higher Education Authority shall support those institutions in the development and provision of lifelong and flexible learning for learners which is A, learner-centred, B, at a pace which suits the needs of the learner. C, is provided in a mode or location suitable to the needs of the learner. This is magic. It absolutely is. You know, to read policy that's informed in terms of its accessibility and openness like this is just, it is transformational. And I think we're at a pivotal time in the country in relation to that. We've got the will of the politicians, we've got the will of the policymakers, we've got the potential of the staff, the dedication of colleagues in terms of research and practice. Such a profound time, I think, a really pivotal time in the nature of this country. And I think that's what will drive things forward. The rest of this text is available for anybody who wants to read it on the Higher Education Authority Bill, and I'm quoting in particular from Article 47 of that. And it does talk about the necessity, I think, to serve communities and also to be sustainable. So how can we build upon that aspirational desire, which is more than aspirational at the moment? What are the practices that we can put in place? What can we do? And I think that the challenge for ATU in particular, or for all universities, is to think, well, how do we best serve those communities? How do we best enable the potential of all of the learners within our communities? So I've got 3 key questions here. How can the Atlantic Technological University network best serve its diverse regions and communities? I'm conscious, as I said, that you have from Letterfrack to particular college in the Gaeltacht area to Letterkenny, obviously, and here in Sligo and in Galway. So just thinking about that kind of diverse nature, how do you best kind of draw the strengths of each of those, so the strengths of each become the strengths of all? And I think, like that, I think the Centre of Excellence will play a pivotal role in that, so that it becomes a collaborative hub, and actually enables the hub to travel around, so that each of those areas has a capacity to share the strengths back into the centre. And how will the infrastructure, resources and intellectual potential be flipped into your communities? How can you better serve those socioeconomic areas of socioeconomic deprivation that you serve as well? So just thinking, a little bit of food for thought. And in doing that, I'm very much informed by Groves and John West Burnham's work about the concept of flipping schools, where they said, like, rather than, you know, the traditional type of school where children kind of arrived in and were perhaps met at the gates and the parents were turned away, it's how do you create those avenues of communication between the schools or between universities, between centres of higher education and the communities that they serve? How do we engage with the businesses so that the practice of accessibility doesn't just stop at the door of the university either, but that we work with employers, that we work with policymakers, that we work with politicians locally to try to develop, well, what about Sligo being a universally designed town, for example? Or is it calling it a town? Is that an offence? Will I call it a city? No? It's a city. Okay, I've been reliably informed it's a city. But how can you work with, how do we create those sort of elements where it's a very strong community base to what we do, so that the intellect that comes with this resource change doesn't stop within the university, but it goes on to inform the nature of the place that we live, the society that we live, the culture that we change. So I think that's the significant challenge that we face. And partly, I think, in how we might get there, I think it's great that we have the idea base, but it's also thinking about how do we create the research base behind that, through design-based research response that meets the needs of equality, diversity and inclusion in local contexts, in national policy, and it transforms the communities that we serve. So using design-based planning is one approach, how we involve the voice of the learners, how we involve the voices of policymakers, and just create diverse teams across disciplines as well, to be able to solve really complex cultural problems that are in the longer term. And in relation to that, kind of thinking about ATU as a global site, and I was just speaking with one of the colleagues here this morning who was sharing that, you know, many of her students are part of the Irish diaspora that live abroad, who are keen to get an Irish degree, maybe thinking about coming back to live in the country, but also thinking about I suppose, the nature of how we engage with those learners in relation to the uses of technologies and accessible technologies, and how we provide for diversity, whether it's linguistic or cultural, or in relation to ability and disability. So just kind of quickly focusing on that nature there. And I'll draw on an example from my own university, where I worked in collaboration with Professor Richard Jackson in setting up from Boston College, in setting up the International Collaboratory for Leadership in Universally Designed Education, and how we've created a hub of universities that exchange practice with one another and that provide insights from cultural insights and resource insights in regards to how best to develop that inclusive practice more generally. And the one example that I'm providing here, I think, is of relevance to the Atlantic Technological University, and that's Unifest's campus, which is in the state of Sao Paulo in Brazil, because they have 9 different campuses, and I believe you have 9 different campuses. And what they have done is collaboratively, representatives from all of those different campuses have worked together to develop an accessibility portal. Now, I'm hoping that you'll get these slides later on, and that the blog which kind of sits behind this, where my colleague Leandro Iannazzi has described how they developed that, the processes of having that representation from across all of the different campuses. And they've built an accessibility portal that provides information and case studies for colleagues right across the board on how best to develop inclusive practice. So I thought that was kind of, in terms of where you're coming from, was a useful example to share. So learning from and contributing to international practice and research. So I suppose for me, there's 5 kind of takeaway messages from the presentation this morning that I'd hopefully like you to take away with you. So identifying our own educational and identity journeys enhances our appreciation for those of our learners. So when we have a better sense of, I suppose, where we're coming from, we can also engage more effectively and effectively with our learners. And chart the times when overcoming barriers to participation in education has been a hallmark of your own educational journey. And extending our understanding of UDL by taking account of socioeconomic and cultural identities, along with linguistic and disability and ethnicity and gender, and considering the intersectionalities between those identity markers, and how they can inform the design of curriculum content, pedagogy and assessment. And then the concept of flipping the university to serve its community, which will enrich the research profile and extend appreciation for what's required at ATU. And maybe a possible audit of, who are the third sector organizations that, are within those neighborhoods and communities. Fourthly, I'd like you to think about encouraging design-based research and research focused on pedagogy, which copper fastens the focus on the authenticity of assessment and will strengthen your learning outcomes, as well as fostering active learner engagement. And finally, building on, you've got a very solid local network and national network, and I'd encourage you to build on that through your global networks as well. And I think you're already doing that. I think you already have 1 or 2 projects on the go, which doesn't surprise me at all in relation to the capacity of the team that's in front of me here. So finally, I'm going to share this little bit of a blurb from Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who is a graduate of Harvard University, but also the first African-American leader, or African female leader, in Liberia. And I suppose this is a bit of a balance to the information that I shared earlier on about the barriers to gender, the barriers to women being able to realize their dreams in particular. So according to Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, if your dreams don't scare you, they're not big enough. The size of your dreams must always exceed your current capacity to achieve them. Start off with a small dream, you may not have much left when it's fulfilled, because along the way, life will make demands on you. So I wish all of you really well with realizing your dreams in terms of the promise and the potential for climbing the UDL ladder and building a culture of inclusion. So thank you all so much.
Thank you so much for that, Sean. I'm just wondering, would anybody have any questions that they would like to ask Sean based on his presentation, or anything at all in relation to UDL? You've certainly given us some pointers as well, Sean. Maureen.
The mic didn't have to go too far. Can you hear me? Okay. Sean, thank you for that presentation. That was fantastic. Just for those of you who might not know me, I'm Maureen Harron. I work here in ATU Sligo. My question, there's so many that I have, but trying to surmise all of it into one at the moment is just, you mentioned the HEA and the policy, which is fantastic. That's huge progression going forward. That's one part of a question. The other thing is, you mentioned a lot about EDI. And at the moment, I've been listening to the podcast by Mags Flood.
Yes, yeah.
And she's talking a lot about EDI and UDL. And Michael Shovlin from Trinity is also telling us that we're at a crossroads in terms of inclusion. Just to talk about the evolution of inclusion down through the years within Ireland, we're very much at a crossroads. So how do we implement UDL going forward and now bring EDI on board? And how do we manage this evolution going forward when we have still so many people that need to really learn and come up our ladder, so to speak?
Oh, that's a big question. It is. But it's an exciting question, and I think you're absolutely right. When people like Michael Shovlin, who's been one of the just key leaders of change within Ireland in relation to inclusive practice, primarily for facilitating access to higher education for younger people with intellectual disabilities. And he's saying that we're at a little bit of a crossroads. I think what it is that we're learning from the successes of the disability rights movement primarily, and that those successes are becoming broader in relation to equality, diversity and inclusion. So there's a recognition, I suppose, that justifiably so, people with disabilities have been enabled greater access to education, and that sense of having a very strong social justice base to the approach and in relation to accessibility and what's right for our society ultimately begins to inform our perceptions around those other areas of equality and diversity as well. And I look around the room here, I'll be honest with you, it's nice to see kind of lots of wonderful people who are very dedicated to the notions of equality and diversity and inclusion, but I don't see the representation that has taken place, the changes that have taken place, I think, within Ireland, culturally or socially, or ethnically, in the past kind of 30 years, So it's that element of challenge as well, and the intersectionalities between, as I pointed out, between elements of maybe socioeconomic deprivation and people with disabilities. So long question. So it's not going to be an easy fix. It's a big challenge. But as I said, I think the will is there. I think the policy will is there, and the practical will is there, and the drive and vision is here within universities. So I think just tremendous bounds can be made, and I think Ireland will be, as it was in the dark ages, a little bit of a beacon for other places. Yeah.
So I really enjoyed everything that you've said. I'm not a lecturer, I'm just an undergrad student, finished with a degree, but I am a disability advocate. Yeah. And, this is all wonderful, but what I find out from students with different disabilities is there's an awful stigma around coming forward and saying they have a disability. So would it not be a good idea that as part of universal design, you will come up with something to work to remove the stigma so that it's all abilities and the students will come forward They will say, oh, I have a learning disability, whether it's something like dyslexia or it's something more serious, but they will get the supports that are available. So you're not doing all this work for nothing, you know, because it's only reaching the people that have a voice, that are there and they're not ashamed of their disability, you know, and to reach out and say, well, you know, I'd like a bit more accessible content, or if my lecturer can send me notes on this. But if they don't register with the access officers and the disability officers on campus, their lecturers aren't going to give them the stuff unless they have a kind of a good relationship anyway with them. So, you know, it's we need the students. We need them here too.
Sorry, can I have your name?
Vicky Matthew, Victoria Matthew.
Vicky,
Yeah.
thanks very much for the question. I began the presentation by talking about that affective dimension, and I'm absolutely committed to that. There has to be that element of voice and empowerment for students. Perhaps I wasn't as clear as I ought to have been around that. It's about empowerment and empowerment to be able to challenge the status quo as well. I think that's ultimately where higher education can really make a big difference. You know, not everybody, as you say, is provided with the resources or provided with the pathways that they need to be. So I think we have to have like really clear and honest, open discussions with our learners, finding out what the learners' requirements are. I'm not going to call them needs. It's a requirement, you know, learning requirement, and able to be for somebody to be able to access their potential to education. So I think absolutely pivotal what you're saying. So to me, it is about that voice. And it's about the resource at the other end, some of the structural resources that exist within universities, and they don't come about easily. So it was really heartening to hear that there will be an additional focus on that resource as far as the Minister was concerned earlier on. Vicky.
I think the resources, like on different campuses, especially like I'm a student here and I know what's available, are brilliant. The thing is, the students are not coming forward. They have a stigma. So you need to change the mindsets for the students coming in.
Absolutely.
That they'll want to say, you know, that they have a disability or a special ability or whatever way you want to put it, and access more of those supports.
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. And again, I think it's about that culture of the university, and I'm sure that that's kind of what hopefully we're working towards.
Yeah, no, but my thing is, can it be part of universal?
Oh, yes, it's built in. That's the engagement part, I think.
To remove the
Yeah,
stigma.
yeah, absolutely. Really important point. Let's do some research on that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
These are never taken on board then with the likes of Access Office from my own experience with students. And the students have, I know in some cases I've dealt with, been denied access to certain resources because they didn't have a doctor's certificate or from a psychiatric, whoever gives out these diagnoses, that the student then is denied the access because they don't have a formal diagnosis. But even though these students could be in their 40s and 50s who are returning to education after raising their own children, and because they have been through the system maybe with their own children with diagnosis and stuff like that, they recognize these traits in themselves. But they're past the stage of getting a formal diagnosis, but they're denied access. So we need to change our mind on this whole thing that you need to have a piece of paper to say you're dyslexic. Do we know you're dyslexic or you're dyspraxic? Individuals know themselves what they need, and we have got to meet them halfway with this.
Sorry, your name is?
Carl.
Carl, thanks very much. You're absolutely setting my mind on fire here in relation to the challenge I think that you're putting to everybody here, actually, because it's not about that piece of paper. It's about our inclusive practices from the start. How do we totally build that in? How do we use Microsoft, which is great tools, you know, in terms of the Microsoft Reader? I know exactly what you're talking about, because the course leader for the National Award, Senko, you would have thought like senior teachers who were in senior roles in primary and secondary schools, again like that, coming to and saying, oh, Sean, I may have dyslexia. You know, I've never had a check, but I may have. And it's about empowering those learners to actually as well access the tools that are available, and so that we begin to professionally develop ourselves as well in relation to enabling access.
Sometimes they may have this thought, and they have had this conversation with us, and we try and move them on to the next step, to somebody else who is qualified in you know, dealing with this kind of thing, because we don't understand all the ins and outs of this here. But that's what I'm saying is, sometimes that then, by doing that there, we have denied them that step. They don't actually move on to the next step, or if they do, because they don't have this parchment that says they are dyspraxic or dyslexic or have a learning disability, they're automatically shut at the door. And we have to change that. And that has happened a lot over the last number of years, I found, with the older cohort.
I think, again, maybe at the risk of parroting the Minister earlier on, we certainly have a long way to go. But I think we've travelled a heck of a long way too. And I think ultimately, I think the challenge is for each and everybody that's here, to be able to recognise what we can do to make significant changes, and how we can work together in enabling those changes to take place as well, as colleagues in relation to research, but primarily about that element of empowerment through the resources. I think the amazing resources now that enable access, so that we're providing materials in advance, although my presentation arrived a little bit later than was preferred or whatever, but we're providing those things in advance. We're enabling our learners to access the materials. They can read those materials themselves. They can generate materials from spoken word. You know, these are the types of things that are enabling at the present. So it's kind of thinking about how do we design our campuses to be much more enabling, and that's actually a challenging. It moves beyond disability services. Disability services within universities are a vital part of this. But I think library and information services are equally critical. I think estates are equally critical. I think the students' unions have a significant role to play, and the academics, so that we begin to collaborate around overcoming a lot of those challenges, whereby people are absolutely empowered. They know that they have the voice, as Vicky was saying earlier on, to be able to say, this is my requirement. Okay, this is who I am, and this is my requirement, and where educators have the capacity to respond accordingly. So that's the aspiration. Thank you.
Sorry, I just have one more. It's not really a question, maybe it's more of a statement, but it's around, funding following a student, as opposed to, an institution. So I'm from Hibernia, and our model is obviously a blended model, very accessible to students. But in terms of funding, we wouldn't have the same access to funding. So for example, we have a student, a student who wants to come to us at the moment, a deaf student, but can't access the funding because we're a private college. So I think there is a question around, funding following a student, as opposed to a public-private divide, I suppose.
I think ultimately everybody should have access to education in terms of equality legislation as well. So, I mean, that is a basic human right. So whether an organisation is private or whether it's state-funded, I think sometimes there are structural differences within organisations that need to be pointed out and that have to be addressed.
Because in terms of accessibility, the model is very accessible for the student, but the funding...
Oh, no, absolutely, but if there are individuals that are completely consistently facing barriers, I think sometimes the organisation has to change. Sorry, but I need to be direct on this one. Okay.
Great. Thank you so much, Sean. Thanks again, Sean. That's just fantastic. So inspiring. You've given us some food for thought as well as we move, as you just mentioned there, we're going to be 9 campuses very soon, and it's about getting that collaboration across all of the campuses. We're very lucky at the moment because in ATU Galway Mayo, we have a UDL development coordinator, Colin, who's kind of bringing that group together and back to our main steering group. We're hoping to do the same, more of the same with ATU Donegal, and that way then we'd be able to have much more collaboration. Just to say as well that Sean is also working with us on the development of our PG Cert and Masters in UDL, and is going to be part of our validation panel in June, so it's just fantastic. There will be no getting away from me now, Sean, now that I've met you, seriously. Can I also just give a very special welcome today? Sean's mom is here, Nancy. The most glamorous looking 87-year-old lady I've ever met. She's absolutely fantastic. So it's brilliant to have you here, Nancy. Thank you so much for coming. So now I want to introduce Maureen Harn, who has led out on UDL initiatives supported by the National Forum SATL funding and iNote project funding, which stands for Innovative Opportunities Transforming Education. And this has happened over the past 3 years. So last year, those of you who attended our conference will remember that Maureen, together with Shelley Brady, worked with 31 lecturers across ATU Sligo, and they voluntarily handed over their module and Moodle pages to be analysed for accessibility of not only their content, but their materials and resources, their teaching methodologies, and their assessment practices. And that's not an easy thing to do, just to hand over your work to be scrutinised. But through the development of an ATU Sligo audit toolkit that Maureen and Shelley devised, they provided lecturers with one-to-one feedback and recommendations on how to make their modules more accessible. This year we wanted to build on that development, but this time to consider the students' perspective based on the changes to those 31 modules. In total, 1,232 students were impacted by the review, and Maureen's presentation now tells that story, the student voice.
Good morning. I'm just going to move the slides ahead a little bit here to catch up. There we go. Thank you, Niamh, Professor McCormick, Dr. Flynn, and Minister Harris. You're all very welcome here today, and Sean, you are certainly a very hard act to follow, but I'll try my best. And I do hope that what I'm going to talk about today will answer some questions for you, Vicky, especially because it's completely centred around the students and the students' experience with UDL. So after last year's conference, the need to develop UDL further within teaching and learning in the Institute was obvious, as so many colleagues that attended were in search of figuring out what UDL has to offer their practice. Many conversations pointed to the effectiveness of UDL curricula, changes for students. It was then that I realized we needed to capture the impact on those who learn as a result of UDL curricula improvements. This is where the idea of conceptualizing the student voice came from. The communication pathway was the focus groups that I carried out with students here in ATU Sligo. So that's me. So a little bit about me. As you know, I'm Maureen Harn. I'm a former Chicago Public Schools teacher. I'm a lecturer in the Department of Social Science here in Sligo, teaching academic writing skills to first-year students on the social care practice and early childhood care education programs. I'm the program chair and lecturer on the Postgraduate Certificate in Teaching, Learning and Assessment, and over the past 2 years, I've led on development of the Professional Master of Education in Post-Primary. I'm also a PhD student in Queen's University Belfast, where I am focusing on the concept of could perhaps a new theoretical tool such as UDL that engages with Bordeaux's socio-theoretical perspective of education as a field be the driver of change in relation to initiatives and strategies for inclusive education in Ireland's higher education system. As Ireland has now ratified the UNCRPD, we are at every level of education now faced with the new direction of the pendulum swing in the evolution of inclusive curriculum. Initiatives such as this one informs how we move forward to implement UDL. So there are 5 areas that I will touch upon today. The first is the National Forum for Enhancement Teaching and Learning Initiative context, just for those who aren't aware. What did we seek to do? So conceptualizing the student voice. How did we do it? And I'll talk about the National UDL Digital Badge rollout, questionnaires and focus groups. What did we learn? So common themes that have emerged and findings through this evaluation. And then finally, next steps, answering the so what. So how do we move forward? So our first area to review is what did we seek to do? The National Forum for Enhancement of Teaching and Learning, for those that aren't aware, promote professional development for teachers, digital teaching and learning capacities, enhancement across disciplines, and student success across higher education in Ireland. The image before you focuses on the student success strategy priority. A call went out last year for the strategic alignment of teaching and learning enhancement in higher education. In answering that call, as the project lead, I proposed zeroing in on the student experience and conceptualizing UDL through their experiences. This proposal speaks to Initiative Type 001, the focus on supporting and highlighting the value of teaching and learning enhancement within higher education institutions. So switching the focus. For the last 4 to 5 years, I have worked with Niamh on moving UDL forward in supporting staff through facilitating local UDL digital badges within what was formerly known as IT Sligo, and building a network of UDL champions, which is the stronghold of our Udl Working Group in Sligo. Through UDL initiatives taken on successfully by Cathy O'Kelly, Mairead McCann, Shelley Brady, Ellen McCabe, and myself, whom are all UDL Working Group members, we have been actively progressing UDL in teaching and learning for educators. The milestones are flagged here in blue. However, the time has come to not so much switch the focus, but broaden our view to include students as active stakeholders in their learning by introducing them to inclusive education practices such as UDL. So the next area that we need to cover is how did we do it? So the Udl Digital Badge is one of the open badges of the National Forum for Enhancement Teaching and Learning. It was developed and coordinated by a head in UCD's Access and Lifelong Learning Unit, and the badge provides educators with the foundational concepts of UDL and supports educators to implement just one change to make the student experience more inclusive by undergoing a redesign within their practice. 2 years ago, the developers moved from promoting the local badge rollouts to a national badge rollout. This has proven highly successful as the uptake has seen over 2,000 participants within higher education and further education complete the badge over the last 2 years. As a facilitator of the badge for several years here in Sligo, I have worked with Dara Ryder, Trevor Boland, and Lisa Padden, whom are all badge developers, in capturing the redesigned data for Donegal, Sligo, Mayo, and the Galway campuses. In terms of how many staff and from which programs have completed the badge, we needed to know this so that we can gauge where we've been with UDL and where we need to go. For this initiative, I've contacted all those who completed the 2021 national rollout of the badge within ATU Sligo. So how did I do this? With a lot of persuasion. To understand what it is that my colleagues felt needed to be captured by students, I turned to them and asked the recent badge participants to complete this MS form with questions that they felt important to ask various students. This questionnaire, guided with brief descriptions of the sections, included being equitable learning, multiple means of engagement, representation, and action and expression, which also happen to be the 3 principles of UDL. As well as this, I provided the opportunity for them to engage further by nominating student groups. So our focus groups, how were they formed? 15 UDL badge participants completed the questionnaire. 6 lecturers nominated students that were part of a UDL redesign. 4 student focus groups were conducted, 1 in the Faculty of Engineering, 2 in the Faculty of Science, and 1 in the Faculty of Business. 12 students between the 4 focus groups participated overall. This entailed over 4 hours collectively of communicating their UDL experiences. From the questionnaire, 18 questions were devised for the interview guide. All students invited to participate were sent the questionnaire. The questions followed the same format of the UDL questionnaire sent to badge participants in relation to the sections with headings related to equitable learning and the 3 UDL principles. So what did we learn? This is the interesting part. The student responses, this is what we needed to capture. So the next few slides are a snippet of the overall student responses from the focus groups. With 18 questions answered by 12 people collectively, the extent of the content is too much to lay out comprehensively. The following, though, gives an idea of how students perceive UDL in relation to their learning. So in this first question here, students were posed with the following. Equitable learning has been described as being inclusive, fair, and impartial. In the context of your learning, what does equitable learning mean to you? And these were some of the responses from students. Equal opportunities in our studies. Image of the playing field with equality boxes. I'll come back to that one. Access to information regardless of background or identity. One student recalled the image here to the left of the equality versus equity. You can see the boxes when used effectively can provide an equitable versus an equal user experience. This student's perception really opened up the dialogue for this particular group. All of the groups offered a fairly accurate and relatable context. Then I asked them, do you think the module information was communicated and displayed in a variety of ways and forms to ensure all types of learners could access the material? And the responses ranged from, yes, there was a lot of flexibility in the module, to Teams was used and it was very effective. The information and the content on Moodle was easy to access. The chat function was active and all recordings were available. So overall, the groups communicated. They found the module information was displayed in a variety of ways for access for all learners. The next one, though, is interesting because it provides insight into the student perception of UDL. So they were asked, tell me what you know about universal design for learning. One student commented, I have no prior knowledge. Another said it's a set of principles that give individuals equal opportunities to learn. Another said UDL, for example, is using simpler language that students can understand in slides, etc. After posing this question, I gave each group a whistle-stop tour of UDL before we could progress further with the interviews. Some lecturers do inform their students that they're undertaking continuous professional development on improving teaching and learning, and some do not. I was aware of this as a badge facilitator, so I was prepared to include the explanation into the interview. To engage with the questions that followed, the students needed to be able to ascertain how UDL was included in their program of learning. This part of the interview took some time, but was well worth it due to the discussions that followed. And for those students that stated they weren't aware of their lecturer's UDL CPD being worked into their module, from once they learned what UDL is, they mentioned they could see what improvements their lecturers had made as a result. That was really interesting because you could see light bulbs going off after the explanation. You could see people saying, oh, well, when they said that I had choice of assessment or choice within assessment, that's what that was. So it was really interesting to see that the differences in the two groups that were aware of the changes and the two groups that weren't, because the two groups that weren't could immediately make the connections. I'm just going to keep moving because I'm aware of our time. So now that the students had a description of UDL, the next question is, based on your knowledge of UDL, how is it an appropriate approach to teaching and learning? One group stated, students who do not get their learning needs met may leave their course. Unbeknownst to the students of this group, they were homing in on a problem that presents right across third level education, and that is attrition. These students see a direct connection in how UDL can help them stay on their chosen path. The next response was based on how you've described it. I can see my lecturers varying materials and assessments. Changes were obvious to students from once they had an explanation of UDL. And the next response, students made a connection to UDL and authentic learning. This one is really interesting because all four groups made a connection to authentic learning. They commented one change that was really good was how assembly was taught, and it was made practical in real life as opposed to PowerPoint and learning efficiency on PowerPoint. We had to do a whole class exercise broken into different days and classes and in steps, just like assembly, making an assembly line of learning of it. It stuck with me, and I remember all of it as opposed to just memorizing. I learned it. It was authentic. It is appropriate because it is allowing people to become interactive instead of essentially copying notes off the whiteboard, which is not interactive. So another question was, if your lecturer made it a point to inform you that your program was undergoing a redesign, explain how did you know what was being redesigned? The following was found. 2 groups were aware, 2 groups were unaware. The lecturer, this is a comment from a student, lecturer told us they were undertaking a program and making slight changes. We didn't know it was UDL, but we could see the changes and these were good. Another said we were given questionnaire for module improvements. Another group said lecturer asked early on if and what were the points we found difficult or uncomfortable in earlier education and how they can improve that. The lecturer was always looking for feedback and making changes to suit this. Based on our preference of learning, the lecturer provided synchronous and asynchronous options of learning. So these are things that really stood out for students. The next was, what aspects of the module did you find beneficial to help you engage with the material and gain a greater understanding of topics and your learning? The lecturer used different programs and we were kept from being bored as she varied the materials, made it more interesting. Practical exercise, real-life experiences in the classroom, empathizing with users and their experience, choosing specific pieces of assessment, choice in topic. Another said, less stress in choosing the format. This one is what gets me. Hit or miss, struggled with the freedom of choice. I'm going to come back to that. Another student said the lecturer had us doing tasks we wouldn't normally like, but because of this varied approach, we didn't even know we were doing research, and it made the learning more enjoyable. Just to go back to that other comment, the hit or miss struggled with the freedom of choice. Often students remark on how their learning history has not allowed for choice, and this can be a point of stress for them in having to make decisions in their learning that is not traditionally expected. This relates to the concept of unlearning, which I'll introduce in a few moments. So again, just a snippet here of our overall student interview responses. So the common themes. From the 4 focus groups, there emerged 4 common themes that they each touched upon. First, authentic learning was 100% of the groups. This was mentioned within each group. All these students find that when they're allowed to be the practitioner while in a supportive space within the classroom, that they remember the material better. The next theme was flexible learning at 75% of the groups, giving this a specific mention. They found hybrid approaches to be very effective. Following this, in 2 of the 4 groups, or 50%, mentioned the preferred lecture structure as video, slides, explanation, that's the structure that they had preferred. They explained that visual representation followed by text and verbal discussion solidifies their learning. Finally, the 3 of the 4 groups, so 75%, mentioned visual sketches or graphics. How lucky are we here today to see this in action? So, like what you'll see shortly from Tamsin and Jennifer, to be highly effective in their learning. The students mentioned this specifically. They said that if they could see things being sketched and drawn while they're discussing it, that it stuck with them and the visual representation was more effective. These 4 themes represented the commonalities within the groups. So next steps, answering the so what. So anytime we conduct a study, be it research or an evaluation such as this one, it is expected that we have a purpose. In other words, what does this information tell us and what do we need to do with it? So nothing about us without us. This is a common phrase in relation to students, and one that I've taken on as a result of carrying out this evaluation. Firstly, I apologize for the text-heavy slide. It's not very UDL. However, I do want to bring in the words of our last year's keynote, Professor Frederick Fauvier, in relation to including students in our UDL progression, as it relates so well to this evaluation. So bear with me on these 2 text-heavy slides. Much of the literature on the this is coming from Frederick Fauvier, much of the literature on the implementation of UDL now focuses on either the buy-in or the resistance of educators, not the perceptions of students. We have certainly spent some time here, but not in haste. However, it is time to bring the students into this equation. Part of the reflection that needs to occur within the UDL movement around power will inevitably lead to a reconsideration of how UDL implementation should occur. The strategic implementation of UDL across campuses has thus far strikingly ignored students as stakeholders. So there you go, Vicki, there's your answer. We're going to fix it. It will be impossible to promote UDL on campuses if a significant effort is not made to involve the student body as stakeholders. And then he went on to say that this involvement could take the shape of workshops and information sessions, but will need to eventually grow in scope. It will require the involvement of student unions and will eventually need to incorporate full and formal consultation of the student body in order to identify campus-specific variables that need to be taken into account in the way UDL is enrolled. As Fauvier points out in this 2018 Ahead journal publication, a concerted effort with strategy and direction needs to happen with our third-level students. This study has certainly highlighted his sentiments for me. And just to connect about the unlearning, just to bring that in, because it really, it's really poignant at this point with students and with ourselves. We have to understand what unlearning means. And it's actually very popular kind of buzzword at the moment, unlearning. So the publication, Unlearning by Alison Posey and Katie Novak, they're two UDL experts, speaks of how we need to recognize our learning and biases and unlearn these within the brain and then relearn using a reformed approach. This is accomplished through understanding, variability, focusing in on goals, breaking away from habits that are not serving all learners, and scaffolding expert learning. Our students and ourselves as educators all have something to gain in this approach. Students need to be aware of how they learn and what is available to enhance how they learn. By educating students on the UDL principles and ensuring them that it is okay for them to be active participants in their learning, we can begin to include them. So what's next? What do we do with this new knowledge? One option is to consider to create a UDL student toolkit made by and for students. This information provided by the students can work to inform and improve practice and the student experience. The Higher Education UDL Centre of Excellence will centralize teaching and learning UDL efforts across the ATU, support UDL research and further implementing UDL across the Irish higher education sector, but a massive partner in this success is our students. So it is imperative that we include students as stakeholders through the following: establishing an ATU UDL student working group, workshops, rolling out information sessions, working with students' unions, and possibly even consider creating a digital badge for students in UDL. The UDL students' perspective can enrich our teaching and positively impact their learning. So just a few resources. I talked about Unlearning and I talked about the podcast by Mags Flood. So Mags Flood is with the NCCA. And just to help you keep your finger on the UDL pulse, this is a podcast. It's called Talking About All Things Inclusion, and it's available on Spotify. Mags provides insightful interviews by international experts such as the UDL founder, Dr. David Rose, Dara Ryder, CEO of AHEAD, Katie Novak, Alison Posey, and Professor Frederick Fauvier, just to name a few. These interviews are insightful, and each offers their own UDL contributions. The next national rollout call for the UDL Digital Badge is underway, and you can find out more information on the AHEAD website. So if you're a believer in what you're hearing here today, the badge is a great place to start. Trevor Boland is holding an information session on the 31st of May, so anyone from the higher education or further education sector should check out their webpage for more information. And the resource here is our own. It's from the ATU Sligo UDL Moodle page. We have useful resources available here. There's more on the 3 principles of UDL, the previous successful UDL initiative, which was the UDL Module Audit Toolkit information and resources to include when going through programmatic review, the incorporation of Blackboard Ally, which is a plugin on Moodle that provides multiple media platforms for students and drills into materials to guide educators on making their content more accessible. Recordings from our last conference and so many wonderful UDL showcases are also found here. The 2 empty boxes will be this year's conference and the UDL Student Experience Evaluation. So thank you very much for listening. Are there any questions?
Thanks a million, Maureen. You can meet Maureen over lunch anyway to have a chat with her. If there's something you'd like to ask her about the project, either this year's project or last year's project. But now I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce Tamsin Cavallero, who's a lecturer in the Department of Social Science here at ATU Sligo, and Jennifer Gilligan, instructional designer also in Sligo. Both Tamsin and Jennifer have just done fantastic work in developing not 1 but 2 modules in graphic facilitation with digital badges, one for staff and one for students. This work was funded through the iNote project and in collaboration with ourselves in teaching and learning. So please welcome Tamsin and Jennifer to the stage to present their topic, Capturing Magic, How Graphic Facilitation Can Build a Culture of Inclusion.
Hi everyone. So we're just going to bring on a journey, are we? Yeah? Okay. So graphic facilitation uses a variety of visual approaches and creative media to capture big ideas, to map processes, engage audiences, and present information clearly. Influenced by the work of designers and architects, it began in San Francisco in the 1970s, and it continues to grow. Graphic facilitation methods are used by community organizations, software engineers, healthcare planners, and educators. The method enables participants to visualize problems and to come up with solutions. The combination of words and pictures are presented in a big picture perspective, often on a large chart or screen, a mural, or a picture gallery. And if you look around today, you'll see some of the big picture examples at work. These will develop throughout the course of the day to capture content and to reflect back key themes and big ideas. My interest in the work of graphic facilitation developed out of practitioner-based experiences working as a home youth liaison officer with the travelling community, supporting young travellers and their families to access and remain in education. Intergenerational educational disadvantage combined with traditional nomadic practices meant that many of the older generation of travellers received little education. Combined with a culture based on oral traditions as opposed to the written word, and at times sporadic school attendance, this often resulted in poor literacy levels, often for the older generation of travellers and Roma. And this was sometimes reflected as a subsequent mistrust of the written word. So today I'm working with paper and post-its, and later we'd like to invite you to join in the process with us. And throughout this presentation, we'll show you examples of how graphic facilitation can be used to work digitally to support distance learners, as well as in a face-to-face environment, as we bring you on a journey through the process of developing a graphic facilitation digital badge module for students. So this semester, we began delivery of a 10-week digital badge, the Graphic Facilitation Digital Badge for Students, funded very kindly by iNote and by me. The module was designed by Jennifer and myself, and the student voices that you hear in this presentation are based on feedback that we collected from this cohort.
So Tamsin and myself used the AD model in the 5-stage approach to designing the graphic facilitation module. So it stands for analysis, design, development, implement and evaluation. In all of these stages, we put the student to the centre of all our design decisions. Each phase of the model offers opportunity for iterations and changes before moving on to the next one, which allowed us ongoing reflection. This method also allowed for a flexible and responsible approach to the module, which took into account the diverse needs of our students. In making time to forge the lecturer and instructional designer relationship allowed us to combine a structured pedagogical approach. We learned from each other and we drew on each other's strengths. This is the combination of magic that we refer to in our presentation. It also gave us the freedom to experiment with creative approaches. After all, we wanted to model creativity with our students. In looking further into the AD model, firstly, we carried out an analysis. We broke down the learning objectives, decided on the instructional design approach, and then we started testing strategies which provided feedback on the learner's progress and engagement. Next, we bounced backwards to the evaluation of our previous iteration of the module, which informed us on lessons learnt from our past experience. We then broke down the delivery into content, accessibility and engagement, moving on to development and implementation, and then back around to the evaluation of this iteration. The combination of lecturer and instructional designer meant that we were able to fill in the gaps between what we know works well in the classroom and what is required to support the student in an online environment. So in looking at our instructional design approach was built upon Gagne's 9 events of instruction. This instructional model splits the process of learning into 3 essential stages. before, while and after. So looking at the before, in that stage, we wanted to gain students' attention, tell them what they were going to learn, and stimulate recall. We done this by presenting eye-catching visuals in the form of visual agenda and establishing a student-to-student exercise through structured weekly activities. These activities encourage students to work together and share work with each other. And then while we were presenting the content, it was presented through live classes, and these were recorded for students who could not attend. Tamsin guided students through the practice of creating graphics by drawing live on the screen, and this gave students templates and exemplars which led them to independent practice and sharing of work during these live sessions. Because the students were recruited from all disciplines across the campus, this created huge variety in the interpretations and application of graphics. After presenting the content, Tamsin provided feedback through images, audio and text, and students presented all of their work through on a weekly basis through a live visual e-portfolio. Everything we created and they created was then stored on the Moodle page.
So when we finished the module, we asked the students key questions based around different aspects of UDL that you're going to see on the screen now. So we asked them what prompted them to sign up to the course, and we asked them what kept them engaged. We asked them what did you like about the way the module was delivered, and we asked them how they plan to use their new skills in the future. And then we asked them how did creating an e-portfolio compare with other assessments that they'd taken. So now we're going to play you some feedback from.
The main reason why I signed up to the graphic facilitation course was to enhance and improve my communication skills, where particularly in research, you have to adapt to communicating to various different audiences. You know, one day you could be presenting to experts in your field, and the next day you could be talking to students that have no background in the field whatsoever. So I was recommended this course not only to actually help me break down and understand concepts and theories, but to also help aid in communicating complex topics in a much more clear and concise way. And what kept me engaged throughout the whole course was definitely in relation to how the course was delivered online. And I think I can speak on behalf of everybody in the class that the live sessions were definitely a key part of the enjoyment of the course, as you know, the fact that everybody came from different disciplines and different departments, it just made it that much more interesting, where we could all learn from each other and through all the different perspectives that came up throughout the 10 weeks. And yeah, it created that perfect learning environment, really. That's the only way I can describe it. And in relation to our developing our visual ways or e-portfolios, it just made it that much more practical. You know, you actually learned by doing in comparison to writing reams and reams of words on a page. So yeah, overall, if there was another 10-week graphic facilitation course to further enhance our skills, I'll be there. Sign me up.
Okay, so the images that you see on the screen now are from the recent cohort as well. So the students who've just completed the module, and these show some of the ways that graphic facilitation can be used to enhance reflection.
Hi, so my name's Victoria Matthew, and I was a final year student studying sports with business. One of my lecturers actually sent me an email regarding this course and said it could be something that I was interested in. I was interested in taking it because I'm a disability advocate as well, and I'm very interested in promoting inclusion in sports for children and adults with disabilities. So I thought this could be an additional tool that I could use and make my presentation skills a lot more accessible. So what kept me engaged? Well, Tamsin was fantastic. You know, she always briefed us on what we were going to be doing in the session and took us through it step by step. it opened up a different way of thinking for myself. Usually I would take a lot of notes, you know, during classes and that, but, you know, a couple of weeks in, sitting in lectures, I found myself, I was doing little designs and drawings and maybe adding a few words in, and I find it helped a lot with my memory. I enjoyed the live drawing classes, and, you know, we were a very supportive kind of group, and sharing our work, I think, helped us grow in confidence in that. The sway was something I'd never used before, and I think it's a great way of presenting work. And like, I've studied marketing and, you know, carried out health promotion campaign and that on campus, so I was able to utilise these skills in that, and they helped me design posters and flyers as well that I used in that campaign. So when I was carrying out my dissertation this year, I put like wallpaper to my wall with brown paper and just got out markers, and when I was going through transcriptions of interviews that I carried out for qualitative data, I drew my symbols, you know, and it helped me map things out and make connections a lot easier, instead of having like 60 pages in front of me and trying to figure out where I was going with stuff. So I found it really, really good. And then about sharing my work on Sway and that, it was quite easy. Like, Tamsin provided us with a walkthrough on how to do it, and once you knew actually that it existed and how to set it up, it's a brilliant way, I think. It could have other purposes, maybe of, you know, developing your own personal portfolio, like for CVs and things like that, and maybe for making presentations in class as well. You could use that along with other Microsoft tools. Thank you.
So these visuals that you're looking at now, these also show ways to facilitate planning and thinking strategically about how to implement new skills.
I just found with doing the graphics facilitation course, along with learning graphics and images, I just found that I got even more creative. Like, I was never really an arty person or drawing or whatever, but I just found I got very creative after completing the course, and more I just found with doing the graphics facilitation course, along with learning graphics and images, I just found that I got even more creative. Like, I was never really an arty person or drawing or whatever, but I just found I got very creative after completing the course, and more confidence in my skills to become creative. Just for example, I'm on my placement with the Special Olympics, and it's involved a lot of work of, say, developing resources such as, say, PowerPoint presentations, different resources, like worksheets maybe for athletes in relation to health, about different topics, maybe nutrition, hydration, mental health. And I've also had to design newsletters for like healthy clubs, just with different health news and information of what's happening each month, such as, say, maybe like Skin Cancer Awareness Month or World Health Day, things like that. But my supervisor was actually complimenting me about my creativity skills, and I found even in myself that when I was creating these resources, that graphics facilitation really helped me in that way to even just organise my work and structure it. Just even structuring, we done like one of our weeks, it was done on structuring content, and I just found like stuff like that really helped me just to become a bit more creative and think outside the box, for developing a few things like that. I thought back to my graphics facilitation, and although I was using maybe just, say, images on Canva or, say, PowerPoint, I wasn't actually creating images, but I found even just the way I was structuring them, and it had given me a lot more ideas of what I could do to make my work kind of unique and accessible and things like that. So thank you very much, and I really enjoyed the course.
So in looking at the Moodle page, the interface can be divided up into three main sections. You have blocks on the left-hand side, you have an introduction area or summary along the top, and then the main content space below that. Most attention is drawn to the top section, so more visual stimulus is needed to gain attention from the middle section and we wanted to avoid scrolling beyond the middle section so as to retain the students' maximum attention. So then looking at our own Moodle page, these informed decisions resulted in prioritising accessibility at the top of the blocks, presenting a visual summary of the module and an introduction video in the introduction area, locating visual cues below this, and then compartmentalising our content into visually appealing tiles. All of our design decisions were considered alongside UDL principles.
Engagement. The in-class sessions were open, fair and welcoming, so I was able to communicate and felt safe contributing ideas. I enjoyed the homework activities, as it makes you reflect back on what you need or think about what could be done in what way for next session. The feedback was excellent. She gave great constructive feedback that I would definitely develop in the future. She also commented on aspects she found appealing, which was nice to hear. The feedback was so detailed, reinforcing and clear, with lots of positive comments and an honest and polite identification of areas to improve and work at.
So the weekly sessions are recorded and uploaded to the Moodle page so that participants can continue to practice with the videos after class. And whilst there is a structure, the class can adapt to reflect and incorporate students' interests, whether they're hobbies such as football teams or useful resources for organising meetings or planning research processes. So drawing live with the students and them seeing me learning and making mistakes helps to create an inclusive space. So that's the activities. And the graphics help to set the tone of the learning environment, providing students with cues about how to interact with one another and setting the tone for the learning environment. And then my feedback models for them how to further provide one another with supportive and constructive feedback.
Delivery. I like meeting new people. Learning about other online softwares like Miro that can be utilised in other areas of work. I also learned the importance of reflection, as each week we had to say what we thought was challenging and what you did good. Sometimes you forget to actually stop and look at your progress. It's a creative but structured outlet, following a syllabus and being able to upload and monitor my progress from week 1 to the end. Providing creative feedback each week made the lessons personal yet equal for all to engage and enjoy. This module can help boost your creativity in your other work that you may be completing.
So these images here show us experimenting with online software together and thinking through how it can be adapted to facilitate a particular requirement. So here we're exploring Miro and I'm demonstrating how I've used it to work on structuring particular layouts. And these visuals show some of the students' work illustrating some of the practical assignments about thinking about creating standout content for the job market, whilst also thinking about structuring content.
Materials. The Moodle page was very useful. Tamsin was always very prompt to put up the recording from each week if we missed out to be able to catch up with them. The communication was always very good. It was great to get the weekly emails after the class with what had been done for each week in relation to homework and e-tivities. The e-tivities were always relevant to what we would be completing in class. I enjoyed all of them. They were clear and it was fabulous to see all the others' work as well and give positive feedback as well as seeing their interpretations of the topics.
So the sketch notes that you see here are created by the students. And it offers practical skills with note-taking and, again, thinking about structuring content and listening.
Assessment. I think Sway was an excellent way to store all the work we completed. I use Sway often to look back at work done previously for inspiration and ideas. I like how Sway provides an easy access to your visual dictionary, as I couldn't imagine going in and out for files for inspiration. On average, I spend an hour per assignment, However, out of choice, I would spend a further 2 hours doodling, drawing and practicing.
So the ePortfolio tool, like Miro, offers students new ideas about displaying content in appealing and engaging ways that is accessible across a changing resource landscape, and it provides them with necessary skills for entering the professional environment.
So thank you everyone for listening to our presentation, and we'd really like to thank all of our students who gave us permission to show their work and to complete those video interviews. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tamsin and Jennifer. Capturing magic is at the very essence of what you do. I think graphic facilitation is a brilliant way to reinforce learning and to increase engagement with our students. It makes sense when coming to learning or thinking about a very complex idea. What helps to stick in our brain? Is it a really long, detailed report or a colourful graphic that will help highlight maybe the main points of a topic? Tamsin and Jennifer are going to return later on today to update us on their graphic facilitation art, so we'll see them later on. Just before we break for lunch, we have one more presentation, and I'd love to introduce Cathy O'Kelly and Mairead McCann, both lecturers from the Department of Business at ATU Sligo, and Professor Janet O'Neill Scott, all the way from Georgian College. It's just fantastic to have you here, Janet, with us today. This presentation is especially dear to me as I worked really closely with the three presenters and also with our international manager, Patrick Lynch, to bring this fabulous project to fruition. I know you're going to be blown away with how Mairead, Cathy and Janet have turned this project idea into reality and learn how they came about coining the project Operation Brent.
Just move us, so there we are. Thank you, Niamh, for the big build-up, and I hope we can deliver now after all the wonderful presentations that we have been engaging with this morning. I suppose we wanted to use this opportunity today to really share with you our experience of embedding UDL principles into a collaborative online international learning project, a COIL project. And COIL, if those of you who may not be aware, is an opportunity to build a virtual internationalisation experience for students into a programme without the need for mobility, a requirement to travel. We, I suppose, in designing our COIL project, we didn't really like the term COIL, so we branded our project Operation Brent. And as Niamh said, our idea for the brand came from the migratory geese that come from Canada to Ireland each year and then return. So a bit like the international mix that we wanted to build into our project a little bit. And I think part of what we want to maybe, and my colleagues will talk a little bit more about, is how we embedded UDL into the actual design. But what I'd like to do is talk maybe a little bit more about the project initially to give you a sense of the flavour of what we were actually engaging in. So Operation Brent itself was a 7-week-long collaborative project, and we had students participating from 2 modules. One module was a business management module delivered in ATU Sligo, and the other was an executive administration module delivered in Georgian College. So the students were asked to participate in a project, and from the start we wanted to embed UDL and to build in very much that space in which students could engage. The project, we had a shared common interest in UDL, which we identified very early on in our own group formation and in those early brainstorming sessions when we initially came together virtually ourselves to decide what we were going to build and do together. So that sense that we wanted to model the experience, and I think we've heard that from a few speakers this morning about modelling the skills and the engagement that we wanted our students then to experience themselves. So the project, we decided we also had a common interest in sustainability. So the project was centred on the students exploring the UN Sustainable Development Goals, but to add in that sense of an authentic assessment and maybe to layer the challenge in the project, we also brought on board an industry partner. And again, because of that Operation Brent theme, we were very lucky to source a partner, Brogies Garavogue Limited, and the Sligo members will recognise the Garavogue name straight away, the river in Sligo. But one of the business partners there actually had immigrated to Ontario, and their food manufacturing business was based between Ontario and Sligo, but also with international bases in Spain, Poland and the United States. And Ken Tracy, that business partner, was very enthusiastic to come on board in this experiment that we were developing. So the students had to work together to explore the goals, to select one of the Sustainable Development Goals, and then to apply it to Brogies Garavogue Limited, and to see how that company could actually implement sustainability. So there was a lot of challenge, and it was that sense of flexible means and fixed goals as part of our approach to UDL. So we have heard, I suppose, a good bit this morning about our awareness of what UDL is and what it's trying to achieve, and getting the point, particularly that idea of building UDL into the design of the curriculum from the beginning. So that assumption that our classroom was going to be diverse. And I think that was the discussion earlier, that not all students maybe will have that voice or want to declare the challenges that they have in the classroom. So we emerged from a starting point of assuming those challenges were going to be there, and to make a safe space that the students also in their shared learning experience could raise those issues between themselves, because COIL projects are group work, and what we often say, uber group work, and we know group work is challenging, and trying to do it virtually across international borders brings that extra sense of challenge there as well. So we know, if we think about our own classrooms, they're diverse. And I think what we've tried to capture, if you can see the screenshots on screen, is kind of, I suppose, that flavour of diversity that was in our virtual international classroom. So we had students, again, we had the added challenge of doing this project in semester 1 of this year, during COVID restrictions, during lockdowns. So our students in ATU Sligo were back on campus for the first time for those students. Our Georgian colleagues were still working remotely. So we had different time zones and challenges. The students themselves were very diverse in terms of cultural backgrounds, age, experience and ability. So really what, I suppose, in UDL that we're trying to realise and to, I suppose, deal with, to make, as we've said, that the requirements of the learner are met in that virtual classroom. So as you can see, students also were grappling with those differences in terms of access, access to broadband, to Wi-Fi during the pandemic as well, but also in terms of the hidden curriculum in our institutions. And also, as we said, that extra layer of challenge in terms of we weren't quite sure what was going to happen the next day or the next week in terms of the COVID restrictions that we had to deal with and integrate into the practice as well. So at this point, I'd just like to hand over to my colleague Janet, who has travelled a long way this week. And she's going to talk a little bit more then about how we did we weave in those threads of UDL in terms of multiple means of representation, engagement and action and expression into our Operation Brent COIL project. So I'll hand over to Janet.
Thanks, Mairead. I'm mindful of the time, so I will make sure to hit the high notes. When we talk about multiple means of engagement for our COIL project, the aim for us really was to provide our participants, because they're students, a global mindset, which would give them a skill set in that environment and some competencies. So to do that, our first point of order was really to develop a UDL toolkit for students to have and use if and when they desired it. And what that meant for us was considering as faculty, how do we keep these students motivated and how do we get them to collaborate and build a sense of community in a virtual space? That was paramount for us to start with. And for us, that virtual interaction had to be designed in such a manner that had an intentional and purposeful learning space. So we chose Teams to host our learning space, particularly because of the integration of Teams and all the other applications it could use. But one of the key points of using Teams was to give students their own space, their own channels. Set it up, let them engage and choose their level of engagement, but then also use additional resources to collaborate as they saw fit. And having them source that gave them the project scope in their entirety to participate on their playing field. That was huge for us to be able to say, we need to layer your expectations throughout this project, but we'll give you some guided framework. So we provided templates which help students simultaneously encourage critical thinking and independent working, but also feel that they had a framework and an infrastructure created for them. Our project had clear parameters, but it also prompted their creativity in choice. So the way that we could show this is the UN Sustainable Goals that Mairead had talked about. Our students were asked to research them, but we gave them the scope and freedom to choose which they wanted to engage with, and that ultimately gave us a better outcome. And at the introductory stage, we decided that we would bring in an external third party to help us guide the cultural experience. And that was provided for both the students and the academic staff to enhance just the awareness, but also the engagement, and let the students understand what their opportunity was for intercultural learning and really start to engage using multiple means. How could we do that? Everyone that was involved enjoyed the process in their own way. When we talk about multiple means of representation, we've heard that a couple of times today, so we'd like to showcase how we did that in our project space, and this is at a course level. We looked at consistently providing the students resources in the formats that they could engage with. So we gave them a project handbook with assignment descriptors. We gave them sample templates using brief, short, instructional videos to help them really assist the learner in describing the assessment criteria. They could engage with it when they wanted to, and the application of their project elements became accessible to them. We gave them a team charter framework, and it was created for students, and then they got to choose the rules of engagement for their project with their peers in both written and verbal expectations, and that helped guide their collaboration with, again, that purposeful intention. The next example is our multiple means of action and expression. Students were given a choice in their capstone project of how they wanted to represent their project, and they negotiated at a group level which method they wanted to use for presentation. They had flexibility to decide on a multimedia presentation, a video presentation, or a PowerPoint assessment, and this really supported the UDL framework in the form of customized rubrics. They were able to be designed and facilitated for this universal strategy, and the students understood that from the onset of the project. So now I'd like to hand it over to Kathy, who's going to talk to us about how we built in awareness for UDL and the creation of our UDL posters.
So thank you, Janet and Mairead. Okay, so as part of the assessment process, the groups were invited to prepare a poster that could convey their ideas to our industry partner, Brokeries Limited. So the graphic that you see here is kind of a melange of the student work. So as Janet explained, the students, they were encouraged to, embrace their own strengths within the groups, and they were supported to do that. So what emerged was a reflection of the individuals in each team. So the following slides that I'll show you, it demonstrates some of the examples of the poster submissions, and we're absolutely delighted to say that some of these have been published today at this UDL conference, which is a huge accomplishment for our students. It's lovely, it's coming full circle. So as with our students, no two are the same. So the posters, they communicate ideas and meet the learning outcomes in relation to recommending sustainability solutions to our business partner. However, the format in which this is expressed differs per group. So the autonomy provided by the assessment structure and the resulting freedom of expression is evident. We empowered our students and they embraced it. So we tried to create a diverse, culturally stimulating learning environment. The students became excited and this challenged the learners in our respective institutions. The motivation for the students to display their experience in a manner that represented their unique journey through multiple means of engagement, it increased the students' buy-in, which made our job a lot easier. So the first one here I'm showing you, this poster is all about linkages. So this interpretation here, it's a visual representation of their experience. The student voice demonstrates awareness of the importance of their communication skills and developing intercultural awareness. So the challenges are acknowledged as part and parcel of the experience. And so it was something to be embraced rather than feared. So keywords that you'll see here, and I know Niamh is going to make the slides available to people afterwards and you'll be able to look at it. But the keywords, and this is the student's voice, they're about understanding. And they said, we are analytical thinkers. And their project was overwhelmingly successful. So we were very pleased, and a clear sense of achievement is expressed in this student work. So the next one that I'll show you is much more text-focused. So the students actually asked us to provide them with photographs of themselves, so that they could include it in the project. So we were delighted to do that because it took a lot of pride in their team collaboration. And this poster references how overcoming challenges resulted in team camaraderie and a sense of achievement. So they could identify their own learning, and they stated that through their project work, they gained real-life valuable experience that will benefit us and prepare us for the workforce. So they mentioned that through this process and challenges, we developed individual skills and came together as a team. So in their voice, they said, we highly recommend students participate in future COIL projects if given the opportunity. So that was great feedback for us. The last one I'll show you here. It's a less text-based approach and a little bit more artistic, so that would lean to Tamsin's strengths there. And it conveys an understanding of the importance of embracing sustainable practices, which is what the project was focused on, and how you do that in a business environment. So the engagement of our Sustainability Officer, Fiona Britton, who is here with us today, helped create an awareness and understanding for the students about the importance of sustainability. So we had the Sustainability Officer voice, we had the industry partner voice in terms of their needs in their business environment, you had us as faculty, and then the students took all that information, worked on their projects and gave us back the output. So for this poster, the insights were saying they gained an understanding of the importance of working under pressure. We all gained an understanding of the importance of working under pressure because we did this in 7 weeks in the middle of a pandemic, so it was fairly challenging. And they felt that they found themselves capable and confident to work in a similar situation if they find themselves in that in the workplace. So part of our vision in designing the COIL project, it was to embed employability skills, and this has been successfully achieved and recognised by the participants, which is very important as well to us. So the last one that I want to just show you here is feedback in relation to what are the students saying, what do they tell us? And we captured this in relation to a form of a reflection that was also built into the student project because we wanted to evaluate the student experience of this pilot project. So leaning into the principles of UDL and as the theme of this conference, capturing the student voice, our ambition was to build a culture of inclusion that was fair to all of our students. And again, Vicky, listening to what you had said earlier on, if you have spent time with us, one of our symbols would have been the Lady of Justice. It's like everyone is getting a fair chance here. Everyone is going to get every opportunity that we can provide. And that was very much our ethos throughout the project. So we wanted every participant to reach their own potential. And diversity was to be embraced and the process was to be valued and appreciated for its own merits. So Simon Harris, Minister Harris mentioned earlier about the journey. And for us, it wasn't necessarily the destination, but it was the journey that was important. So we wanted the students to enjoy their learning. It wasn't something to be endured. We wanted them to actually enjoy that. Because for us, we wanted to be part of that and we wanted to enjoy the whole experience as well. So, reaching the destination, it brought its own rewards. And the students will reap that, as they embark on their future careers. But the journey was, as I said, very important. So obstacles that we had figured out, things like, fear of failure, they were removed from the path of learning. And then the real adventures began to unfold. So some of the language that was used to convey the student experience is captured in this graphic. And the students, we're happy to say, they engaged with mutual respect, ideas were generated and opinions were considered. So the students became engaged, and what may have at the beginning been viewed as criticism became an exchange of constructive feedback. So the process was certainly not without challenges, and that was experienced by Mairead, Janet and myself as faculty, as well as our students. So I can certainly say on behalf of the team, we walked the talk, we journeyed alongside our students to reach the final destination, but bonds were formed and lasting friendships have been, developed across the Atlantic Ocean, which is, something we're very happy about. Now I have one question for you. Hands up here who is familiar with the term persnickety. Okay, this was one of our conversations yesterday, because you're going, this is like the sort of thing we've experienced and our students experience. If you look at this slide, so the one word there that you could see is, it's contrary views. So like differing opinions, contrary views. The other thing that kept coming out was contrary. Okay, so you're going, it depends how you want to look at this. Is it contrary views or is someone contrary? Then Janet's like, what are you talking about contrary? And we're going, so we had to explain contrary, and you remember the rhyme from years ago. So then she explains, oh, that's persnickety. And you're going, now that's just 5 minutes yesterday. But I went, that's the sort of thing that we were dealing with on a regular basis. So the feedback that we got, the students, it was very powerful. One of them said, you gave us the chance to be students and decide how or who we wanted to be. So given the pandemic environment, given some of the students had never set foot on a campus, that was very, very powerful feedback to me and or to receive, and we were very happy. So, it was a privilege for us as faculty to provide such a rich opportunity to the students to experience what we say, the sweet taste of success. Like that was really, really lovely. And that was part of their educational journey. The most telling part was the laments from the students when it was all over, right? They were really sad that this is all over. We were really happy. We were going, it's done. But they were like, oh, I wish it wasn't finished and whatever. They said, that they really think that students should have, an opportunity to do this again in the future. And we've listened to that. So one of the things that we're actually doing, because we know, as Simon Harris again said, this matters. So one of the things that we're lucky that we're being supported to do is to set up a COIL Academy. And we're going to further this ambition to embed UDL in the learner experience. And I'm delighted to see some of our colleagues here who have already come forward and have expressed interest in working with us on this so that we can bring this forward. And I think one of the things that struck me there was, if your dreams do not scare you, they're not big enough. I can certainly speak on my behalf, and I'm not sure about you, going, we're dreaming big, and yes, we're scared, but we're going to go for it. So thank you very much for your attention, and if anyone has any questions, please feel free to...
Thank you so much to Kathy. I mean, now you can understand how easy it is for me to work with all these people. You just throw out an idea and people come forward immediately. And then, as I said earlier, once I have you in my grip, there is no escape. But that was phase 1 of the project. We're on to phase 2 for next semester, so hopefully next year you'll be back presenting on that again. Really look forward to working with you and with Patrick on this, because I think it's just fantastic. And as you say, the students love it as well. And students love variety and love something different. And you certainly provided that. I think everybody's probably starving and dying for a break at this stage. I'm going to blame Simon Harris because he was late. But we're going to break now for lunch over the main canteen. Our students are outside, so they're going to bring you over just as you're able to navigate it. There's lots of toilets on the way. But I would ask if you wouldn't mind coming back and being in the seats at 2 o'clock, because we have a full afternoon of UDL-themed presentations from across ATU and St Angela's. So see you later on. Thank you.